By the time Eisenhower is president, there is a huge new flow of cash into defense industries.
He was the first to acknowledge that a permanent military establishment would be required during this period, but that unless we could find some kind of breakthrough, that in fact it would end up creating a terrible cost.
The cost of one modern heavy bomber is this: a modern brick school in more than 30 cities.
It is 2 electric power plants, each serving a town of 60,000 population. It is 2 fine, fully equipped hospitals.
We pay for a single fighter plane with 500,000 bushels of wheat.
We pay for a single destroyer with new homes that could have housed more than 8,000 people.
This is not a way of life at all, in any true sense. Under the cloud of threatening war, it is humanity hanging from a cross of iron.
My father, as president, had strong guiding principles. He used to say, modern weapons take food from the hungry and shelter from the homeless. And so he was fighting with the Pentagon all the time for asking for too much and Congress for giving it to him.
I don't think we should pay 1 cent for defense more than we have to.
Well, Eisenhower saw us starting to build program after program that was just out of control. And his own ability to shape national security policy was being hemmed in by these forces he couldn't control, and he was the president.
On at least one occasion, Eisenhower was heard to say by those in the room, "God help this country when somebody sits at this desk who doesn't know as much about the military as I do."
My fellow Americans, this evening I come to you with a message of leave-taking and farewell, and to share a few final thoughts with you, my countrymen. We have been compelled to create a permanent armaments industry of vast proportions. 3.5 million men and women are directly engaged in the defense establishment. The total influence, economic, political, even spiritual, is felt in every city, every state house, every office of the federal government. We recognize the imperative need for this development. Yet we must not fail to comprehend its grave implications. In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex. The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist.
You have to realize this is one of the great presidents, great military leaders on his way out the door. And at the end of his second term, he says, by the way, watch out for the military-industrial complex.
People know that he invented the phrase military-industrial complex, but very rarely do you see the whole thing and realize how utterly strident his warning was. I think it's one of the most profound statements ever made by an American president.
We must never let the weight of this combination endanger our liberties or democratic processes.
Dwight D. Eisenhower, he warned the people that the military-industrial complex was taking over the country.
The idea that Obama is somebody who is going to come in and exercise real authority when he's obviously been chosen and given everything that he's got by these financiers. They give him the money, they give him the bundling, they give him vote fraud, they give him the media whores, they give him goons, they even have elected officials making threats. All of this is the mark of a puppet, and that means that he is a puppet, actually more of a puppet than anybody else, more of a puppet than Mrs. Clinton would have been, even more of a puppet than McCain. He's the maximum puppet that we've had certainly since Jimmy Carter. The way in which they make policy and rule is that they are a polycentric oligarchical system. You have to be a finance oligarch. Remember, this is not a society ruled by generals, not by priests, not by bureaucrats, not by demagogues, none of those, but by bankers. Bankers rule, and the bankers set up these institutions. They set up things modeled on the Royal Institute for International Affairs, Chatham House, and the Milner Round Table of the period right after the Boer War, so even before World War I. You had the British setting up these round tables, institutes with publications and conferences, and this is how they make policy. When you look at the U.S. ruling class, you'd have to say that they're a really pathetic bunch of failures and bunglers. They are a miserable excuse for a ruling class. And that's one of the big problems we have, is you go from Clinton to Bush to Obama. What stays the same is the ruling elite that gives these puppets the orders that they act on. And these orders are wrong-headed, let's say the least. They're basically bankrupt. They're going to lead to the collapse of this civilization. What they're doing is using the existence of the United States as a formerly powerful nation state to act out their Wall Street fantasies of world domination and maintaining their capital structures and maintaining their system of looting. And this can't be done. So the basic question is, they've hijacked our country and you got to take it back from them. You've got to drive Wall Street out of the government, and at that point you'd have a reasonable chance of getting back to prosperity and some kind of peace and order in international affairs.
How could people be so stupid and gullible to believe a bunch of political people?
So people who voted for Obama were trying to express, I think, first of all, something worthwhile. The hatred for Bush, Cheney, the neocons, the desire to punish the Republicans for their adventures, their police state, and their economic depression. The second question was on the economy. People felt that Bush was selling them down the river into a world depression. He is, of course, the new Herbert Hoover in that regard, so they were trying to get something different from that. The tragedy, of course, is that Obama is there to frustrate and to deceive all of those hopes. Obama is a cruel hoax. He's a bogus sham. He's an absolute denial of everything that you'd expect from an American president.
Franklin Roosevelt came to power in the 1932 election with a mandate to regulate the banking and financial systems. The Securities and Exchange Commission was started at this time, and the Securities Act and the Securities Exchange Act were passed into law. These two laws, both of which are still alive and well, dealt with initial public offerings and with the secondary market for stock trading. Glass-Steagall was passed at about the same time as the Securities Act. Glass-Steagall set up a wall between banks that offer commercial banking services and those that are investment banking operations. Before Glass-Steagall, banks could both loan money to businesses and, at the same time, sell shares in these businesses to their investment clients. This was seen as an obvious financial conflict of interest. Glass-Steagall was strengthened in 1956 under President Eisenhower. The Bank Holding Company Act made it illegal for banks to underwrite insurance policies, although banks still could sell insurance. These laws were successful. They worked. But as the decades passed, the banks hungered for higher profits. In 1999, Congress passed the Gramm-Leach-Bliley Act, and President Clinton signed it into law. Gramm-Leach-Bliley repealed Glass-Steagall. Now the banks were allowed, once again, to combine investment and commercial banking under one roof. Now their agents were free to loan a lot of money on speculative ventures, knowing that they could sell these investments to their clients. Deregulation of the financial markets always has the same two consequences: concentrating wealth in fewer hands and economic chaos. The chaos is beginning. With luck, re-regulation will follow.
About this Obama with change. Look at the people he's put in to mastermind the economic recovery. Larry Summers. I love it. Every time they talk about Larry Summers, he's always brilliant. He's another brilliant one. He's the one that helped dismantle the Glass-Steagall Act, the banking act that was put in place in the 1930s, so the banks couldn't become the banksters that they become.
In the 1990s, you had the beginning of the derivatives bubble, thanks to people like Alan Greenspan, Reuben Summers, a lot of the people who are now back in the Obama administration. And the derivatives, I think, are the centerpiece of this entire problem today.
These are the same people, Geithner from the Treasury Department. Could you imagine that? Now we have the U.S. Treasury Secretary, who also is a Robert Rubin protege of the Larry Summers Group, that dismantled Glass-Steagall and broke apart the regulations that would have prohibited the banks and brokerages from becoming these criminals. He was the former president of the New York Federal Reserve, and now he's our Treasury Secretary. And as we all know, the Federal Reserve is as federal as Federal Express. It's a private bank. And now we've put this guy in charge of it? I mean, can't be Wall Street has hijacked Washington in broad daylight.
A lot of people think that the Federal Reserve is already part of the government. They're not. It's controlled by cliques of unelected, unaccountable bankers meeting in secret. Most of these people have never even been through the formality of a Senate hearing or a Senate confirmation. They claim that they're part of the U.S. government. They masquerade as if they were part of the U.S. government. But in reality, this is a purely private operation. Jackals, hyenas, raptors, all of them loyal, not to the American people, but to the Wall Street banks, which is where most of them come from.
In 1913, the money power of the country was taken away from the people. By constitutional privilege, it belongs with the Congress, but it was given up in the Federal Reserve Act. The Federal Reserve is no more federal than Federal Express, but yet it has the power to determine the direction of use of money in our economy. If we could take that power back and put the Federal Reserve under Treasury, we start to be in a position of being able to control monetary policy on behalf of the United States people.
And these are the people who claim to be the saviors of the economy, the people who have created every important crisis in the past 100 years, the Federal Reserve. So it's illegal, it's unconstitutional, and it's a failure. And I think the failure is what everybody can see right now. Up until about the Kennedy assassination and the beginning of the war in Vietnam, the United States is a very powerful engine for world progress. It's the assassinations, the Kennedy assassination and the others in the 1960s, the beginning of the Vietnam War, and the beginning of the absolute domination of the Wall Street group over every other interest. Nobody else counts except the Wall Street money masters. That has now made the United States into no longer a force for progress, but something very different, often a force for destruction in the world. That doesn't need to remain that way. The interest of the American people is to fight to take your government back from Wall Street and make the United States a force for progress in the world, which we easily could do if we could just break the power of the people behind Obama.
People that are knowledgeable know that the fight that this country has been waging since its inception is for the central bankers not to take over the country. And that's why people like Andrew Jackson were elected. And that's why people revere people like Thomas Jefferson and others. The takeovers happened, and it's a corporate takeover. And it was something that Abraham Lincoln warned. And this is, by the way, why I believe he was assassinated. This is the Lincoln quote. The money powers prey upon the nation in times of peace and conspire against it in times of adversity. It is more despotic than monarchy, more insolent than autocracy, more selfish than bureaucracy. I see in the near future a crisis approaching that unnerves me and causes me to tremble for the safety of my country. Corporations have been enthroned. An era of corruption will follow, and the money power of the country will endeavor to prolong its reign by working upon the prejudices of the people until the wealth is aggregated in a few hands and the republic is destroyed. Wall Street has killed Main Street. The military-industrial complex has taken over the country along with the Wall Street gang.
If you look also at the people that Obama has put on his appointments list, it's all Wall Street. It's government of Wall Street, by Wall Street, and for Wall Street. There's nobody from heavy industry. There's nobody from the auto sector, nobody from Silicon Valley, nobody from big oil, nobody from defense, no labor, no women, no retirees, no small business, nothing. It's pure Wall Street. The only people who have a voice in Obama's councils are Wall Street finance oligarchs. That's all there is. Nobody else counts for anything under Obama. It's the most extreme Wall Street administration we've ever had.
The National Security Act of 1947 created the CIA. It was written by a man named Clark Clifford, who was a longtime aide to Harry Truman. Okay? Clark Clifford's profession was he was a Wall Street banker and lawyer. Clark Clifford is also the man who brought a bank called BCCI into the United States in the 1980s, a drug money laundering bank that was exposed for laundering drug money. The design for the CIA, in other words, the people who told Clifford how to write the act, were two brothers, John Foster and Allen Dulles, the Dulles brothers, Dull, Duller, and Dullest. John Foster Dulles was Secretary of State to President Dwight Eisenhower. Allen Dulles was the DCI, not from 81 to 87, he was the DCI from, I think, roughly 1953 until about 61 in the Bay of Pigs when John F. Kennedy fired him. You know what their profession was? Wall Street lawyers at the law firm of Sullivan and Cromwell, which is today the most powerful law firm on Wall Street. Bill Casey, the man we just saw the memo addressed to. We know he was Ronald Reagan's DCI. What did Bill Casey do for Richard Nixon? He was chairman of the Securities and Exchange Commission. Stanley Sporkin, one of my favorite turkeys, was CIA General Counsel during the 80s. He used to email back and forth with Oliver North. Dear Stanley to Ollie, Stanley to Ollie. It was very funny. Okay? Do you know what he did before he became... No, he was the General Counsel to the SEC. Securities and Exchange Commission, charged with monitoring all securities transactions. David Daugherty, CIA General Counsel after Stanley Sporkin. You know what he does today? The Executive Vice President of the New York Stock Exchange for enforcement. Isn't that great? And then we have a gentleman by the name of A.B. Buzzy Krongard, and we're going to hear a lot about Buzzy Krongard tonight. Buzzy Krongard is currently the CIA Executive Director. The top three positions are DCI, Director of Central Intelligence, DDI, Deputy Director of Intelligence, and Executive Director. Buzzy Krongard was, until 1998, the head of an investment bank called A.B. Brown. A.B. Brown is involved in insider trading connected to September the 11th. He's a Wall Street banker. As a matter of fact, 6 out of 7 of the first deputy directors of intelligence came to CIA from Wall Street. The mission of the CIA is to control money and cash flow for the benefit not of you and me, but for the benefit of the banks and the stock brokerage houses and all of the interests that control U.S. politics.
Obama is notoriously a liar. He promised that he would get out of Iraq, I think within 16 months at some point. We had Samantha Power telling the Scotsman that he wouldn't be bound by those promises, and sure enough, he's now not going to be bound by those promises.
Barack Obama swore that he would vote to repeal the Patriot Act, but then he voted for its reauthorization. Obama decried the Bush administration's illegal warrantless wiretapping of the American people. Then he voted to legalize it.
Obama pledged that he would filibuster any attempt to give retroactive immunity to the telephone companies, the telecom companies, except he then turned around and voted for that bill.
Most people don't know, for example, that he voted to reinstate the Patriot Act and more government wiretapping.
Candidate Obama told desperate factory workers in speech after speech that he was going to renegotiate NAFTA and GATT to make it more fair for American workers.
It is absolutely true that NAFTA was a mistake.
But then his campaign was caught sending out memos to top corporate leaders, telling them not to worry and that it was just campaign rhetoric.
We had Obama saying, you know, I'm against free trade, I don't like NAFTA and all those free trade sellouts. We had Austin Goolsbee going to the Canadian diplomats and saying, don't mind him, he's just popping off, that's just election era rhetoric, doesn't mean anything.
Presidential candidate Barack Obama was publicly criticizing the North American Free Trade Agreement in a bid for votes, but privately telling Canadian officials not to worry about it.
Obama voted for a reinstatement of the Patriot Act. And by his early deeds already, again, as we saw with the issues of retention, he's willing to send people that have been charged with nothing to be tortured to so-called get the truth out of them.
Generally speaking, this is already the biggest liar and the biggest disappointment that we've seen in recent history. And again, qualitatively beyond the rather low standards set by Bush the Elder and Clinton in terms of delivering on promises.
They'll make up one lie after another. And if you believe these people, knock yourself out. I don't believe a word they say.
Step by step, Americans are losing their grip on liberty. So says best-selling author Naomi Wolf.
The great dictators learned from one another what was essentially a blueprint for closing down an open society.
Wolf's book, The End of America, chronicles a fascist shift she says began under the Bush administration. But with a brand new leader promising to reverse the wrongs of his predecessor, could America's freedom still be under assault? Here's where RT's interview with Naomi Wolf begins.
I believe certainly that there's a fascist shift taking place, or rather that the foundation was laid during the Bush administration and that it has not been dismantled. Barack Obama is slowing things down, but Barack Obama campaigned on promises of restoring the rule of law, restoring the Constitution, rolling back, closing Guantanamo. And in many ways, the gestures he's made since he's been in office are symbolic. He committed to closing Guantanamo. I was there 2 weeks ago. They're building it up. He hasn't rolled back the Patriot Act. The Patriot Act is still in force. The surveillance apparatus is still in force. For all we know, journalists were being surveilled under the Bush administration. For all we know, that's still continuing. He is pushing for preemptive detention, which is an absolute foundation stone of a police state. So we are by no means back to America, as the founders envisioned it, America premised on the Constitution and the rule of law. We're still in a very serious situation. What's frustrating, in a way, is that he does it so gracefully and so charmingly and so charismatically, saying all the right things, that I think many people have kind of stardust in their eyes about what actually has not changed, in some ways gotten worse. His Justice Department made the same argument about the State Secrets Act, that they won't disclose information about torture against detainees because of claiming state secrets privilege, that the Bush Justice Department made.
Well, in May, President Obama reversed his decision to release torture photos of Iraqi detainees. Now, those photos reportedly depict many prisoners being sexually abused and sexually tortured by U.S. soldiers. Now, the U.S. president said that he could not disclose those photos because he would be putting U.S. soldiers in danger from the backlash that might occur.
Belatedly, America is waking up to the fact that the torture that was endemic in Guantanamo, in Abu Ghraib, at Bagram, U.S.-held prisons around the world, black sites, wasn't just the work of a few bad apples, as Bush claimed, but was directed from the top. Now there's documented evidence that Rumsfeld, Rice, Cheney, and Bush himself knew about the torture, directed the torture, created structure. But what is not as well known is the sexualization of the torture. But when you make the case to the American people that the systemic torture included anal rape of prisoners with objects, with light sticks, rape of women, rape of children, that this was videotaped, and that there's a, basically evil unfolding, that it's a sick, perverse mentality being played out systemically, it is very difficult to maintain that posture. So it's well documented that these photographs exist. And you're quite right that Obama said that he would release them. And let me note, it's not up to him, right? If you really have the rule of law, these images are not entertainment to be released or withheld depending on the political winds. They're evidence of crime. And he doesn't have the power to withhold them. But you're quite right that now, because of pressure probably from the CIA, because they are implicated in the torture as well as the military, up and down the chain of command, and they don't want to be prosecuted. All of these things are flatly illegal. Because of that, he has reversed position, and he's saying, I'm going to withhold them. And the reason he's giving is, if we were to release them, it would be used as propaganda. It would harm our troops. You know, I was just in the Muslim world. I was in Jordan. It's no secret that these crimes took place. You know, many of the detainees are speaking about their sexual humiliation, their sexual abuse, sexual threats, as well as the kind of torture that we already know about. And that what threatens our troops, what endangers our troops, is the cover-up and the refusal to prosecute these crimes.
In your book, The End of America, you note that in September 2006, Congress passed the Military Commission Act. And you said that that law, and I'm quoting you, created a new legal reality that heralds the end of America if Americans do not take action. What do you mean by that?
So the military commissions that Bush and Congress established at Guantanamo, basically the U.S. government is judge, jury, and executioner. It's a military judge and a military panel and a prisoner. And you can't get independent counsel. Your counsel is provided by, you know, people employed by the military. You don't have confidentiality, you know, attorney-client privilege. You can't confide in your attorney. Everyone's bugged all the time. You can't get the documents that you need to defend yourself. And your confession that they're using against you has been tortured out of you. And they can use your confession derived from torture against you, which is illegal in a real jury system, a real civil trial. And again, these military commissions trials are modeled on the People's Court of Hitler, on the Moscow Show trials, and on every kangaroo court that any dictator has ever, you know, put together subsequently. No rules of evidence, no disclosure. Joe Della Vedova, spokesman for the Department of Defense, he told me, to my astonishment, because this is not common knowledge among news media or the rights community, that they're moving ahead next week with revamped military commissions, you know, rebranded Obama-style military commissions at Guantanamo, with the same failures to provide due process. He said, we're preparing for there to be three categories. Those detainees who are tried in the U.S. in a normal court. Those who are released to other countries, no charges are brought against them. And a third category, he said, who can't be tried and can't be released. Preemptive detention. Held forever. Held forever. Held forever with no trial. No charges, no trial.
Another issue that you wrote about, which I found rather chilling, is the issue of an enemy combatant. Basically, the president, according to what you wrote, can pluck anyone off the street, knock on their door, get them in an airport, and snatch them, and not give a reason, and say they're an enemy combatant. Does Obama have those powers now?
That right still exists. Obama hasn't given it back. And by the way, the founders knew that no matter how well-intentioned a leader is, if you give powers like this, people never give them back. It's not human nature. So what is so disturbing about the indefinite detention claim that Obama is making, coupled with the enemy combatant right that he inherited, is that it means that he can lock any U.S. citizen up forever without a trial. Now, why is this so chilling? If you study history, what you find is that you can't run a police state without that power. But that once you have that power, you can set up a police state very quickly and very effectively. Because what you do is you target key individuals. And you see this in Myanmar, you see it in Thailand, it's like most recently in Iran. You know, 1, 2, 3. You go after the journalists, you go after the opposition leaders, you go after outspoken clergy, you go after union leaders. And if you lock up, you know, a handful of highly visible people indefinitely. Everyone goes quiet. You don't need a giant massacre. You don't even need giant prison camps. You just need that one power.
In June, we found out that there are 250,000, 250,000 private contractors right now fighting the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. According to your book and other published reports, other investigators, there's no accountability over them. They can do whatever they want.
It's beyond dangerous because the military is minimally accountable to the people. You know, if there's real wrongdoing, Congress can investigate and the laws apply. But with these contractors, I mentioned I was in Guantanamo 2 weeks ago. There are more contractors on Guantanamo than military to a casual observer. And you have functions all over the island that are co-branded, where it'll say, you know, Joint Task Force Guantanamo, the military on one side, and it'll say Burns and Rowe, you know, contractor on the other. And the military people I confronted had to give me some kind of answers. But the contractors who were editing journalists' video, who were confiscating video, who were present when one of the detainees committed suicide, a psychologist who was, I believe, present when a detainee committed suicide, who was not obliged to answer my questions. Can you imagine, you know, medical people, contractors, you know, were building the facility that they said that they were going to close down at the end of the year. Everywhere it was the work of contractors. I would say 60-40. And the thing about the contractors is they don't have to answer my questions or your questions. They wouldn't give me last names. They wouldn't tell me who they worked for. They wouldn't tell me what their function was. When you've got the collusion of medical people in the helping profession in covering up deaths or in torture, you know, you really have crossed over the dark side, and the profit motive of the role of contracting in modern warfare and detention means that there will be increasingly no accountability, and that these entities are increasingly driving foreign policy. It's not the U.S. citizens at this point driving foreign policy.
The clever young man who recently made it to the White House is a very fine hypnotist, partly because it is indeed extraordinary to see an African American at the pinnacle of power in the land of slavery. However, this is the 21st century, and race, together with gender and even class, can be very seductive tools of propaganda. For what is so often overlooked and what matters, I believe, above all, is the class one serves. George Bush's inner circle, from the State Department to the Supreme Court, was perhaps the most multiracial in presidential history. It was PC par excellence. Think Condoleezza Rice, Colin Powell. It was also the most reactionary. Obama's very presence in the White House appears to reaffirm the moral nation. He's a marketing dream. But like Calvin Klein or Benetton, he is a brand that promises something special, something exciting, almost risque, as if he might be radical, as if he might enact change. He makes people feel good. He's a postmodern man with no political baggage, and all that's fake. In his book, Dreams from My Father, Obama refers to the job he took after he graduated from Columbia in 1983. He describes his employer as, and I quote, a consulting house to multinational corporations, unquote. For some reason, he doesn't say who his employer was or what he did there. The employer was Business International Corporation, which has a long history of providing cover for the CIA with covert action and infiltrating unions and the left. I know this because it was especially active in my own country, Australia. Obama doesn't say what he did at Business International, and there may be absolutely nothing sinister, but it seems worthy of inquiry and debate as a clue to perhaps who the man is. During his brief period in the Senate, Obama voted to continue the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. He voted for the Patriot Act. He refused to support a bill for single-payer health care. He supported the death penalty. As a presidential candidate, he received more corporate backing than John McCain. He promised to close Guantanamo as a priority, but instead he's excused torture, reinstated military commissions, kept the Bush gulag intact, and opposed habeas corpus. Daniel Ellsberg, the great whistleblower, was right, I believe, when he said that under Bush a military coup had taken place in the United States, giving the Pentagon unprecedented powers. These powers have been reinforced by the presence of Robert Gates, a Bush family crony, and George W. Bush's powerful Secretary of Defense, and by all the Bush Pentagon officials and generals who have kept their jobs under Obama. In the middle of a recession, with millions of Americans losing their jobs and homes, Obama has increased the military budget. In Colombia, he is planning to spend $46 million on a new military base that will support a regime backed by death squads and further the tragic history of Washington's intervention in that region. In a pseudo event in Prague, Obama promised a world without nuclear weapons to a global audience mostly unaware that America is building new tactical nuclear weapons designed to blur the distinction between nuclear and conventional war. Like George Bush, he used the absurdity of Europe threatened by Iran to justify building a missile system aimed at Russia and China. In another pseudo-event at the Annapolis Naval Academy, decked with flags and uniforms, Obama lied that America had gone to Iraq to bring freedom to that country. He announced that the troops were coming home. This was another deception. The head of the Army, General George Casey, says with some authority that America will be in Iraq for up to a decade. Other generals say 15 years. Chris Hedges, the very fine author of Empire of Illusion, puts it very well. President Obama, he wrote, does one thing and brand Obama gets you to believe another. This is the essence of successful advertising. You buy or do what the advertiser wants because of how they make you feel, unquote. And so you are kept in a perpetual state of childishness. He calls this junk politics.